but I consider DC home because I've been coming here since I was a kid
Mhm.
and have lived in the city for most of my life. So uh, politically, I wasn't ever considering running for public office. I did run the digital campaign for Obama in 2008, President Obama's historic 2008 campaign at the AFL-CIO, the largest labor union in America, reaching out to 14 million union members to advocate for Obama as president. And that was my first real introduction to politics at the national level. Um, and it really helped sort of bring together two of my, I guess, uh, interests. One was technology, using technology to connect with people, and bringing about policy change, because I was really inspired by Obama's vision for providing healthcare, bringing down the costs of healthcare for millions of Americans who, at the time, the Great Recession was ravaging societies across America, and millions were losing their jobs and healthcare. And so, this idea that our healthcare, our basic safeguards about our health, are connected to a job that could be taken away from us, and we lose our right, basic right to healthcare, was to me such a alien idea. And Obama was the first person who, I think, at the national level, stood up boldly and said, this is not acceptable. People are filing for bankruptcies because of their medical costs that keep soaring. Insurance companies are denying the basic right to healthcare, especially if you have pre-existing conditions. And Obama wanted to put an end to that. So that, I think, was sort of the catalyst, I think, in a way, for me to start thinking about, how could I build on this? Um, but I ended up pivoting more into the private sector, started working for ad agencies, trying to cut my, I guess, expertise in the area of marketing and strategy. Worked for companies like L'Oreal and Accenture, did some time in Silicon Valley. So kept developing my digital skills, digital marketing skills, strategy skills, because I felt like ultimately the world was going to become this digital ecosystem where, especially if I was considering a run for public office, I knew I needed to become more proficient at scaling out a digital presence. And last year, about a year and a half ago, when the mayor of DC tried to shut down an app, a ride-hailing app called Empower, which is a competitor to Uber, it got me curious about why this app was suddenly on the mayor's radar. So I signed up to drive for the app, partly out of curiosity, partly also because I was thinking of building a similar app. And as I started driving to parts of DC, took neighbors from, say, Ward 3 in Georgetown to Ward 8 in Anacostia, parts of the city that I normally don't venture out to because, frankly, there's not much to bring people to those wards.
Mhm.
And I saw with my own eyes the massive disparities between parts of DC that most tourists, most influencers show off to the rest of the world, the parts that we maintain, make pretty, plant flowers, have cherry blossoms. And then there are parts of DC like Ward 7 and 8 across the river in Anacostia where there's a massive 17-year life expectancy gap just 3 miles across from Ward 3. There's a um, there's a $240,000 household income gap. And so the more I started driving folks, talking to them, the more I realized solving this huge inequality problem in DC is a much more interesting and much more pressing problem to solve than, say, building yet another hailing app. So that's my campaign. I decided that, Washington, D.C. can no longer be a safe city if it continues to being a tale of two cities, a tale of two economies.
Mhm.
It is the ground zero for economic and health inequality. I mean, the stats are just staggering. And so I made that my fundamental pillar of my campaign to close that income and health inequality gap, which is a huge challenge because these gaps did not emerge over the last 5, 10, 15, 20 years, but they were fundamentally engineered into the city over decades and decades and decades. So that's what I'm trying to undo.
Okay. Um, so as you know, the I'll pivot now to a couple questions about Ward 7 and 8 and about crime
Uh,
there. Um, as you know, Ward 7 and 8 both have much higher crime rates compared to the rest of DC, specifically with violent crimes, but also with nonviolent crimes. Um, I remember a couple of days ago there was a shooting in Ward 7, and then I mean shootings have been happening pretty consistently since the beginning of 2026,
yeah.
even with the deployment of the National Guard. Um, Can you describe to me some policies you plan to implement that plan on combating these crimes and bringing down crime in these wards overall during your tenure as mayor?
Sure. So we have to understand why crime is happening largely in those wards. It is because the foundation of families in those wards has been gutted. Um, Again, over 100 plus years. Many people do not know that Ward 7 and 8 were kind of created as a containment area for the people that, the this side of the river of Anacostia um, was essentially the most prosperous by design for a very long time. And they wanted to treat Ward 7 and 8 as this containment area for folks that they did not want to kind of come over into the other parts of the city. And at the time, there were no bridges, there was no metro connecting these two parts of the city. So it became distinctly two different cities. So what I, as mayor, would like to do is rebuild the foundation of our families, especially in Ward 7 and 8, but generally across DC. And we have to tackle the root causes of crime. And it's not just poverty, but this sense of alienation. I think people in Ward 7 and 8 feel like they don't into belong to the rest of this gold rush that's happening, that's escaping them, that's just bypassing them. They're just, you know, there are no coffee shops that anyone would want to venture out to in Ward 7 and 8. There are no museums. There are no universities. There, food deserts, you name it. I mean, Ward 7 and 8 are so lacking in investment that has just swept the rest of the city that I'm actually shocked the crime isn't much higher. So I will, as mayor, rebuild the foundation of our city, foundation of our families with 36 weeks of paid parental leave, no cost universal childcare. I want to raise the minimum wage to $50 an hour for people who are doing the hardest jobs, building our sewage system that is in horrendous shape because DC has a very antiquated sewer system that was built 125 years ago that cannot handle flash flooding. And so we have folks who come from Ward 7 and 8, work in Wards 3 and 2 and rebuild the city, and they get paid less than $20 an hour. And for them, it just seems like salt on an injury. It's like, why are we not, why are we not making $1,000 an hour that these lawyers are sitting in these, sleek glass buildings? And so there's this sense that they will forever be enslaved to this other class of DC that just keeps, putting their boot on their throats. The other thing I want to do, I want to make schools better in those wards. I was at a mayoral forum a couple of weeks ago, and it was in Ward 8 at this school, which, DC spends the most on education per capita in the nation. And this school, when I went to use the restroom, had faucets that had missing, the turning valves. There was no way to use any, hot water. The soap dispenser was broken. And this is just one school, but this is happening across Ward 7 and 8. There's a 25% teacher turnover rate. There's a 70% absenteeism rate. And so we need to make these schools joyful places of learning and healing. I'm proposing we raise the teachers' minimum base pay to $100,000. Right now it's $50,000, and that's not a whole lot in a city where a one bedroom runs $2,400. I actually am also thinking about adding a $25 a day stipend for students to show up. So, if you're in grade 6 through 12, you show up, you get a debit card. At the end of the day, it gets $25. You perform well, you may get a little bonus. But that will help you at a very young age in Ward 7 and 8 learn how to build wealth, learn how to like save for college, learn how to like maybe help your mom out with groceries. Cost of utilities are going up. Electricity bills are soaring because of the data centers consuming so much, and they're pushing the costs down on consumers. But one of my, I think, I don't know if you've seen my flyers. Again, this is very low for the fidelity because I'm spending less than $500 on the entire campaign.
Hmm.
But it kind of lists out what I would do to rebuild the foundation of the families and bring down crime as a result. And it starts off with the 50-hour minimum wage, but also the $900 rent cap. I'm proposing we build 100,000 affordable homes, not the projects of old, but these, nice buildings that are going up in the rest of the town. I want those going up in Ward 7 and 8. And I want to cap the rent at $900 for a one bedroom, $1,500 for a three bedroom, so families can form in DC. I want like parents with young kids and parents with older parents, the sandwich generation, to kind of live in the same neighborhood. Maybe the grandparents could live in the same neighborhood and take care of the grandkids, cuts down you know, the the rate of juvenile crime, perhaps. But I think we need to foster more of those family bonds that, the government has systematically broken. And so I think we owe it to the people of Ward 7A to repair those bonds. That has never been tried. That has never been tried. And I think I'll be the first person to propose something so radical. People see these flyers and they say, is this a social experiment? Is this a joke? Which is good because I want people to question why we can't have that. The $900 rent cap, it seems like it's absurd, right? But think about it. That's what rent was adjusted in 1980 dollars during the Reagan era. So I feel like even Republicans should support something like this because that's exactly what they had under Reagan. And that's three times more than what the rent is in Tehran, Iran. You could get a nice apartment in Tehran, Iran for $400 a month. I know we're not Iran, but there's no reason why the rent went up so much, even though we kept building. People said if we build more, the rent will come down. But that didn't happen. Greed kicked in. And the more we built, the more landlords started charging. So we need to break that cycle. And I think that is really going to be beneficial in bringing down crime. Last couple of things I want to do. I want to add, because Ward 7 and 8 have just three grocery stores for 170,000 people. Ward 3 alone has 19. So I want to add these small footprint nonprofit grocery stores within a 5-minute walk of every home. You should not, as someone who's surviving on $31,000 a year in Ward 7 and 8, have to take a $10 Uber just to go find a fresh organic apple at a Whole Foods that's across the river, and then take another $10 Uber right back. To me, that is just not sustainable. That is not going to bring crime down. It's only going to make people more angry, more upset, more likely to come into the parts of the city that they see are thriving and do damage there because they feel like you know we can't have this, so we're going to try and destroy this. And a lot of the kids feel that way. And the last thing is I want to make buses 24 by 7 and free. I want to make the metro 24 by 7 and on a $1 flat operating fee. And I'm like, let's try this for 5 years. We've never done this. Let's time bucket it and say we're going to try this for 5 years and see what happens to DC. Can we bring crime down? So yes, it is a social experiment, but I actually want to make it happen and see because this has never been done. And I
Yeah, you
want this to become the standard for how all great American cities all across the US function.
seem very excited about it.
I'm very passionate about this. It's I like big, bold ideas.
Mhm.
And like I said, I spent some time in Silicon Valley and I was there when Uber launched and Airbnb launched, and people laughed at them. They were like, this is never going to work. No one's going to want to jump in some stranger's car or go live in someone's, bedroom and pay them like it was a hotel. But guess what? We did that, and people accepted. Uh, so I think this is to me social engineering for a good reason. I really want to bring the crime down, and we cannot bring the crime down if we can't get the buy-in, if we can't get the behavioral change, and that can't happen if people feel like they don't belong to the city. It's the Rudy Giuliani broken windows, on steroids in a way, because if the windows are broken, you're going to continue to like disrespect the rest of the neighborhood. You want to make all neighborhoods beautiful and clean and safe. And we want people from wards 3 and 2 to go over to ward 7 and 8, meet with their neighbors, because right now that's not happening. Everything is just concentrated in a few square blocks and 2 or 3 wards within DC, and they're generating 80% of the revenue, tax revenue, retail revenue, and the rest of the city. There's so much of the city that is being underutilized, and sadly, that's the reason we have crime.
Yeah. Um, Something else the that I have to cover with this is the Trump administration and their response to the spike in crime in 2022 and 2023. Um, as you know, Donald Trump decided to deploy the National Guard to
Mhm.
in a crime fighting capacity, and to beautify DC with, beautification projects across
Yeah.
DC. My question is, how will you resist federal pressure if you are elected? Um, of course, um, DC Mayor Bowser um, objected to this, but nothing has happened. It's not like they've left. Um,
Yeah.
how will you object to the president's um, overreach of power within the Constitution, to prevent stuff like this from happening again?
So if the desire is to reduce crime and leverage the National Guard to provide safety, I'm in a way all for it, because we're paying their salaries anyway.
Hmm.
Rather than having them sit somewhere not doing anything, I would want them, if the goal is to actually make the city safe and beautiful, we're paying their salaries anyway. By all means, I'll welcome that. In fact, during the snowstorm, I was questioning, why was the National Guard not out there actively clearing the snow? They had like these, they have an amazing amount of equipment that they could have leveraged to clear the sidewalks. And the city's budget was, I think, cut by 1.7 billion when Republicans came into when Trump came back last year, and that really limited the city's ability to like do snow removal, trash pickup. So yes, I would say, instead of DC spending money on doing these things, we're already spending this money with the National Guard. Great, let them do this stuff. Let them pick up the trash. Let them clear the snow. Let them, patrol the streets if that helps bring the crime down. I'm all for it. What what I don't like though is deploying the National Guard and them not doing anything. Because I've seen during the recent snowstorm mess, a lot of the National Guard members were just chilling at the hotels, right? I mean, a friend who lives across from one of the hotels where the National Guard were put up at $300 a night. I mean, we're spending $2-3 million a day on the National Guard being in DC. So yeah, let's just use them the right way, right? I mean, more power to them if they're actually able to make positive change.
Hmm.
And I think they will, they'll, DC is a beautiful city in certain parts, but we want them in other parts of the city, and in a way that is not hostile to the local communities. We want them to partner with the local communities, because the local communities also want crime to come down.
Yeah.
You go talk to folks in Ward 7 and 8, they'll tell you, we don't like this crime. We're thinking of leaving because the crime is so high. So if the National Guard can come in and start building some of my affordable homes, the Army Corps of Engineers, if we can start doing some of these things, if they can drive the buses, if they can, I don't know. I mean, we could use them in so many interesting ways. We have so many of them just kind of sitting around, not really doing something. And to me, this is a national emergency. The crime in DC is a public safety crisis, and we need to tackle it. So let's get all hands on deck. If it means using the National Guard in the right way, let's do it.
As you were talking just there, I just received a notification that there was a drive-by shooting at Georgia Avenue, in Brightwood. near the Walmart Supercenter.
Mhm.
Evidently, crime has not only been reserved to Ward 7 and 8, but I mean, especially violent crime. It's more common also north in DC, north of
Yeah.
the capital.
Panic. Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, it's interesting. DC does not have a single gun store. You cannot buy a weapon in DC. A
Hmm.
lot of these guns that are used in DC's crime come from lax gun law areas, Virginia and other states. Same with Chicago. They found like 80% of the guns that were retrieved in crimes committed in Chicago came from Indiana or Wisconsin, because Chicago has very tight gun control. The problem with tight gun control is if you're only doing it one part of the, a small area, and the rest of, it's like a cancer, right? Eventually it'll come to that good cell, right? And devour it. So this is a much bigger problem. The mayor obviously is literally handcuffed in what they can do, because yeah, so they said, listen, you can't buy guns in DC. You can't bring a gun within 500 feet of a First Amendment activity like a protest, or you'll be arrested. um but drive-by shootings are, again, a metaphor for how disconnected and angry people are, that they come from wherever, and then they create havoc in a part of the city that may be doing well. We used to have random shootings, or, we've had random shootings even on Connecticut Avenue near Georgetown. Several years ago, there were stabbings. So and you know what? We are the only developed country in the world that sees this kind of random gun violence. It's a national problem. And I'm actually shocked that DC doesn't see more of this. So I think in some ways we can be grateful. Like, look at what happened on January 6th, the massive invasion of the US Capitol. I thought when I was looking at the scenes unfolding, we were going to have 300 deaths. We are so lucky that that did not happen. And because that did not happen, we became very complacent, right? So we didn't have the same reaction to it as, say, the 9/11 attacks. Now, if 300, 400 people had died on January 6th, we would have had a very different policy framework in place about safety in DC. So, um, yeah, I mean, crime is random. It's from what I understand from the stats, most of the crime happens in just 5% of DC, right? When
Hmm.
you think about it. So 95% of DC is pretty safe. So we have to, I think, zoom out and kind of look at it from, all right, we have problems. And the problems are also, in some ways, the shootings get more headlines than the fact that in across the US, 25 US service members have killed themselves today. It happens every day. If you look at the stats, it's a staggering number of US military members, veterans, who kill themselves every day. We don't talk about it. A lot of them use firearms. 2 out of 3 gun deaths in America are suicides. A vast majority of mass shooters, are suicidal. They kill themselves. So how do you prevent somebody? You say, okay, you do background checks, right? Great. A person who's passed all the background checks goes out, buys a gun, commits a mass shooting, then kills himself. That's their game plan. How do you prevent that? Right. So we have to tackle the mental health crisis in America, the loneliness crisis. Opioid overdose deaths are soaring. People talk about technology is bringing people together, but it's also dividing us at a astonishing rate. Since 2000, since the internet boom, productivity has gone up, but suicide rates have gone up by 50%. AI may make that worse as AI displaces people, makes them question, hey, what is my worth if AI is doing a much better job than I can? So I think we have to start thinking about mental health in a whole new light in the age of AI, because so many people are turning to AI for advice and guidance and how to deal with life's issues. And yeah, and the responses AI gives sometimes can seem like, wow, this is very profound. But is it, right? How do you how do you decide that? So I think we need to fundamentally start thinking about AI in a whole new light in terms of like not just unemployment, but how are we going to keep people, you know, feeling like they have a place in society? People talk about universal basic income. You may need that because you no longer have a job, which is one of the reasons thinking of raising the minimum wage to $50 an hour for folks who do have a job that AI cannot replace, that automation cannot replace. People digging the sewers, people doing construction, people who are taking care of your child, elder care, bus drivers. Navigating a big bus in DC is hard work. And they don't, it's a very stressful job. I'm actually shocked that we don't see more pedestrian accidents or collisions in the city. So I think we have a lot to be grateful for, but I feel like we're on edge here as a society. And AI might become like this tipping point that, either makes us or breaks us. And I think we have to seize the moment and really with my investment in AI upskilling, that's a $10 billion investment I want to make in preparing the workforce for what AI is going to bring. And I want them to become the architects of this next AI revolution rather than being bystanders. And that is going to increase crime. If they're going to get left out of this AI boom, I think it's game over for DC.
A lot of the crime that happens in DC is I've spoken to Anacostia residents, and they've said that it's mainly committed by very young people, by kids. Uh, I heard one person say that you wouldn't find someone over the age of 25 who would go out and commit violent crime. And then, people as young as 15 are going out and committing violent crimes. Um, considering the fact that, considering this fact, um, how do you plan to sort of make DC a more friendly environment to children so that they are not uh, so inclined to go out and commit crime? And this kind of circles back to what you said about rebuilding families and improving schools in wards 8 and 7. Um, so, yeah, I mean, that's my
Yeah.
question.
So, rebuilding families sounds great in principle, but it's how it's done and how long will it take for us to see the results, right? Okay, one of my pet topics is nutrition. I really want to improve nutrition levels at schools because we have studies that show just if kids got, their required daily dose of vitamins and minerals like zinc and tryptophan, their mood is enhanced and their focus improves and they can actually focus on school. They're less aggressive. They've done studies on inmates where if they were just given the proper amount of vitamins and minerals, their aggression levels drop by 40%. So a lot of this violence in Ward 7 and 8 is linked to three things, aside from the broken families. Uh, Lead. DC has thousands and thousands of lead water pipes. So kids are drinking poisoned water. Lead has been linked to cognitive impairment and increased crime. In the 1970s and 80s, we had lead in gasoline in cars and the crime just skyrocketed. New York City subways would have graffiti all over. America was a much more violent place when lead was everywhere, the paint in the gasoline, the water. And in 1990, the banned finally lead in gasoline and crime plummeted. But DC, we're still drinking lead water, you and I, right? And lead can't be filtered out as easily as some of the other contaminants. So I want to replace all the lead water pipes. It's one of my fundamental platform points in terms of um, bringing down the crime rate. But nutrition, improving the nutrition, bringing food that is healthy and nutritious to more people. If you get the proper diet, your aggression level drops dramatically. And I want these to be affordable nonprofit stores. And like I said, the $25 a day stipend, I want kids to have money in their pockets each day that they go to school because a lot of these families are struggling for money. So the kids are out there doing things to get their hands on money. right? So I'm tackling all the stressors of life with my platform that I hope will send the message to the kids that look, we're looking out for you. We're rebuilding this and we're doing this in a way that hopefully you and your kids can look forward to a much, much brighter future than your parents had. Because this is the first generation that's seen the quality of life get worse
Yeah.
in the first time in American history. And so they're looking at the gold rush that's happening in across the river, and they're looking at the trillions going to the defense contractors and people driving brand new cars and living in Georgetown mansions, and they're like, why is our life so different? And mind you, many of those folks had ancestors who used to live in Georgetown. Georgetown was 40% black, and they got pushed over, and they got pushed over further and further south and east. So I think the crime is a reaction to get rich quick, to build a lifestyle because they want to provide for their generation. So if you put yourself in their shoes, they're not committing crime. They're looking at building wealth in a way that they feel is justified because they feel that their parents were wronged, that the government doesn't care for them. Hey, I'm just going to do this. School sucks, which is true because the schools are just in horrible shape. So yeah, it's juvenile crime is worse in certain pockets of DC that have been the most underinvested in. So that's not a coincidence.
Another thing that I gathered through different interviews was that Anacostia has a big drug problem, and that there are a lot of drugs on the streets. And of course, these are children who do these types of drugs, specifically marijuana, but also more uh, illegal drugs that count as felonies. And I wonder
Yeah.
what you would plan to do when you're elected, if about this sort of problem.
Again, drugs like guns are a uniquely American problem. You don't see this kind of drug and gun violence, say, in the Middle East, right? Or Japan or Singapore, or China. Pick any nation, and we handily beat them in drug and it comes back drug and gun use abuse too. And it comes back to how much stress people feel. And when you talk about drugs, one of the most destructive drugs is actually alcohol.
Mm.
Um, and it's not, it's become trendy. It's become stylized to have a drink at the end of the day. But we are destroying our kids by sending the message that any kind of drug is okay. It's recreational. We call it recreational marijuana, right? Um, I think we need to provide, one of my proposals is to invest $5 billion in what I call the $5 billion creative engine in DC, because this is about defining helping the people who define DC's soul. I want more artists. I want more writers. I want more engineers. I want the next Broadway to form in DC. I want the next Hollywood to form in DC. I want the next, Dave Chappelle was born in DC, but he left. Samuel L. Jackson, born in DC, but left. Bradley Cooper. I mean, you name it. DC has lost a ton of great artists. And I want the youth of DC to be nurtured in a way where their creative talents, the energy can be channeled into something more creative rather than destructive. And we've never done that,
Mhm.
especially in Ward 7 and 8. Think about if we could set up like a Hollywood style movie studio in Ward 7 and 8 and start producing movies and films there. Could have AI studios and start training these kids. We say, hey, $50 an hour, go learn AI, start creating digital art. We've never done that.
Yeah.
We keep pumping more and billions into more missiles, but we've never thought about, hey, our youth, our future is out there on the streets scrapping around for 10, 15, $20 an hour. We could be doing so much with this talent right in our own backyard, and we do nothing. So I think you can't just tell kids not to do drugs.
Yeah.
You have to give them something more interesting to do with their time.
Hmm.
And hey, when When you're 12, 13, 14, 15, a lot of these kids are already so into tech. Let's use that
Yeah.
in a positive way. Let's maybe, I don't know, make them work as like cyber hackers and help with national security, secure our digital frontiers. I don't know. There's the we have to be more imaginative than saying just go to school because the school sucks, right? I
Yeah.
mean, if you have them in school, great. Make their day worth it. Give them an amazing lunch. Teach them something fun that they can actually utilize. Because kids are smart. They're seeing like these courses, these classes that they're taking are really not going to help them because the world is passing us. Tech is moving at an alarming pace. So we have to kind of figure out how to create a solid educational foundation that teaches us humanities and sciences. But at the same time, we have to like prep them for what's next and how we can get them there. So it's going to be, I think this whole idea we go to, school for until you're the age of 18, then you go to college. And then you do 4 years of college. I think a lot of this is going to just get replaced by a lifetime of continuous learning
Hmm.
and working at the same time. So closing the learning and the doing gap. So you're learning, you're doing, you're learning, you're working, you're apprenticing, you're doing things with your hands, you're learning how to do everything, not just the digital stuff. But I think kids should know how to fix a broken pipe,
Yeah.
right? I think they need to know how to fix their own neighborhoods, how to do landscaping, how to plant beautiful flowers, you know, like DC has amazing neighborhoods, but a lot of them are so broken you don't want to visit those places. So maybe
Yeah.
we do a DC beautification project, get the kids and the National Guard working together, maybe. You know, I mean, the National Guard has an amazing amount of training that they can pass on to these kids. And so we kind of bring these groups together instead of like kind of feeling like, hey, we're watching over you. Now let's get them collaborating and building a more beautiful DC together. I know all of this sounds utopian, but in my head, I'm like, and I swear I haven't smoked a joint this morning, but I just get high off of these ideas and I'm like, why can't we get these ideas out there? Why are we stuck in the politics of the old? And that's one of the reasons I'm running as an independent, because I know both political parties have now created this very polarizing environment where they're going at each other, bringing each other down. And I kind of want to shoot between those gaps, right? I want to rise through that and say, listen, we can do so much better as a society if we listen to George Washington, and I say on my flyers, I say I'm like independent like George Washington because he warned us about political parties. He warned us that these factions were going to destroy America. So stay away from politics. We did not listen to him.
Okay. It's a great answer. Um, Mr. Khan, I appreciate